On Media and Society, does freedom of speech exist on social media? And if so, what are the limits to this expression? And you can look forward to our standard features, the video of the week, as well as our game changer. Hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. This is where we give you the platform to probe how news is covered and angles are determined. My name is Peter Ndoro and I'm standing in for Rams Mabote this week. He'll be back with you next weekend. Now, this show is not complete without your say. Connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed to you. Hashtag SABC Media and Society. And you can also call us on Johannesburg 011 714 6841 or 6842. That number again, 011 714 6841 or 6842. We look forward to hearing from you. Now, an estimated 40% of South Africans use social media, and the continued use of these platforms in a digital world requires one to be digitally literate and understand how social media works. However, some use these platforms under the impression that they're informing the public or exercising their freedom of speech. But at what stage does that content breach the guidelines of the law and the parameters set even by the social media platforms? And that's a big issue of debate, particularly in recent weeks, which has seen the incitement of violence, as we saw protests, violence, looting, destruction of property, and sadly also hundreds of people losing their lives. Now, a number of people have been arrested and some have appeared in court. Among them, West Rand politician Bruce Nimmerhout from the Patriotic Alliance, facing charges of incitement to commit public violence. Also, former Ukhozi FM radio personality Ngizwe Mqunu is accused of inciting violence over social media posts. So what does freedom of speech mean, especially when it comes to social media, and where does it cross the line into breaking the law? Let's explore some of these issues, and my guest today is William Bird, Director at Media Monitoring Africa. We're hoping to try and get hold of a lawyer as well sometime during the conversation, but let's start with William. William, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on the program.
All right, so just your overall impressions about, particularly in recent weeks, we saw these protests that turned into violence and looting and damage to property. And throughout all of this, there were people that were seen to be or alleged to be instigating and egging people on. What did you see? What were your thoughts overall before we start delving into it?
So I think that there are a number of very worrying trends. I mean, you said to what extent does freedom of expression go too far? And I think that generally, we've got a very high protection for freedom of expression. If you look at what's in our Section 16 of our Constitution, there's a very limited range of instances where freedom of expression isn't protected and where our laws can then kick in. So those generally tend to talk about advocacy of hatred, propaganda for war, incitement to violence, and that constitutes advocacy of hatred. So there's a very clear protection about hate speech or issue about hate speech, and then there's issues relating to incitement to violence. So we've got a very high threshold. So if you just show violent acts on your social media post, for example, that isn't necessarily incitement to violence. Indeed, if it was, then the media would be guilty of that all the time, because they often show the acts that all of us saw. So to go to that, move to that next level, you then get something else. So I think that what we did see was a lot of really, really worrying footage that sought to deepen existing divides, heighten racial tensions. And when people go out and popular leaders or prominent leaders or influencers on social media, and they talk and they try and instigate people to go out and commit acts of violence and crime, that's when you really have a significant problem. And unfortunately, we have seen a number of those issues. So with the platform Real 411, a lot of people reported instances of incitement to that platform, and a lot of those complaints, in fact, were found to be in breach of the various platforms' guidelines and were removed.
All right, so you've mentioned quite a number of things, and we'll unpack all of them. But let's start with social media, because in many ways it's created a whole new environment. Before, you would have had to have access to some kind of mass media distribution channel, and that now is available to anybody. And also before, you couldn't really be anonymous, but now you can. And that's created a whole new platform of this kind of speech, particularly once social media came into play, didn't it?
Yeah, so people do try and remain anonymous. It's not as easy as they think. Often with a bit of digital digging, people are able to find out who exactly is behind various accounts. And we've seen a number of instances. In fact, there was a court case just last week where one of the people allegedly behind one of these accounts, who was pretending to be a white woman, turns out allegedly to be an EFF councillor. So you've got that kind of thing where people will try and be anonymous. They'll try and set up an account, and they can still be found and identified. But you are completely correct. Now you have the tool. As long as you've got some kind of digital device and access to the internet, you can pretty much get up to all sorts of very dangerous and nefarious things. And unfortunately, a lot of the algorithms on these social media platforms give prominence to, they highlight, and they uprate all of the kind of posts that either heighten emotion or that are things that are getting a lot of traction. And so the more traction they get, the more they get, the more they get distributed and shared, obviously. And when it's something that's violent and emotive, those are the kinds of things that unfortunately tend to get shared a lot. What we did see over that last very violent period was a number of people that were posting weren't in fact anonymous. They were quite well known, and I suspect that a number of them are going to be facing charges, if they aren't already, for incitement.
Let's talk a little bit about those people. And I just wonder, do prominent people, politicians, or children of famous people carry an extra responsibility about what they tweet and what they say? Because there are people who will almost take what they say as gospel.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there are a number of factors around that have relevance to a case. And when a court looks at issues of incitement and they look at the potential harm caused, one of the factors that they consider quite seriously is who is the person that is making these statements. So it's a very different thing. For example, if someone with 20 followers on one of these platforms says, "Oh, I think we should go out and do a lot of looting or attack people," than it is to the son of the former president going out and saying, if you're going to loot responsibly. Like, those things are fundamentally different. And when you have a scenario like that, it really does introduce a number of very worrying kind of elements to what happens on social media. So there's no doubt that someone in the public eye, especially a public figure, has a significantly higher level of responsibility to ensure that if there is violence, they do whatever they can to de-escalate that violence and to not instigate or incite or encourage people to go and carry out acts of further violence. And that's on the simple premise that violence just begets violence, and the more people go out and say, yes, go, 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 the more that it undermines not only the actual issue and the potential for harm, but what it does do is it undermines democracy in quite a substantial manner.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, we're just going to use them as examples, but I think this is an issue that plays out quite often. Former President Jacob Zuma's children. I want to start with Duduzane, because he said what you've just said about looting responsibly. But he said, but hang on, I was not quoted fully. I did an 11-minute interview, And in that 11 minutes, I denounced looting, I denounced violence, I denounced all of these things, but people only used that sentence in 11 minutes. And I just wonder, as the media, do we have a responsibility to make sure the other 9.5 minutes or whatever it is explained, that this is where this fits? Because I must be honest, I don't remember seeing too much of that. I didn't even know that that clip was 11 minutes long until he said it.
Yeah, look, the issue of people being quoted selectively and their words either being edited, and we have seen that, when people seek to deliberately spread disinformation about something, they may take something perfectly reasonable and edit it in such a way that it looks as though they're saying something quite different. And obviously that then gives a different import to it. But of course, I mean, to begin with, he may well have said other things in that sentence, but the fact that he still said that, I think, is a deeply worrying trend. Of course, you do then rely on the media to say, well, actually, we've looked at the whole interview, and on balance, what he said was actually very reasonable, and he wasn't, in fact, doing this. And so that quote was, taken out of context. And that's why you rely on credible journalists to actually go through and say and help people understand what you should and what you shouldn't necessarily believe, So, but again, if you are the person and you are posting those things on social media and you're seeing those things, a lot of people are going to be encouraged to act on whatever they see, especially if those people are going and actively inciting violence.
All right, so we'll chat a little bit more about that, but I'd like to say good morning to Ben Winks, who's an independent legal counsel specialising in media and constitutional and international law. Ben, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
All right, so Ben, let's knock out some of these legal aspects. So the first thing is, how do you even define incitement? What does it mean to be guilty of incitement?
Well, legally speaking, it is to seek to influence the mind of another person to commit an offence. Regardless of what that offence might be, you can be convicted of incitement to do anything. The penalty then under, what is in fact an apartheid law is that it could be the same penalty as if you had carried out the offence itself. And the thing about incitement is that it doesn't even have to be carried out, the thing that you're inciting someone to do. Inciting is enough to be prosecuted.
So, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, can adults be incited? Because you have freedom of choice to decide whether burning down a building is a good or a bad thing. Surely you can't say another adult told me to burn this building and therefore I went to burn this building.
Well, no, it doesn't absolve the person who actually commits the offence is not absolved of their moral and legal responsibility for what they've done. But if you're in a position in society as a leader of some kind and to lend moral or political authority for people to do something, the law attaches consequences to that, and that's it's the position everywhere in the world that you can be convicted of incitement. It can be that you are inciting, it may not be that you're inciting adults, you could be inciting children, but you could be a trade union leader, inciting people during your speech at the beginning of a march. Holding positions of leadership in society carries responsibilities. And if you abuse that position, you abuse your power, then there should be legal responsibility for that.
I suppose it starts to become challenging where some people are quite clever. They know the letter of the law and they stay just beyond that or just before that. They don't quite cross the line. And they might even say, I was speaking metaphorically. I didn't actually mean for people to jump out the building. Do you know what I mean? How do we deal with that kind of thing where there is that line, and when do we cross it? Or does the law accept that sometimes people hide behind the letter of the law and we can cross beyond that in prosecuting?
Well, in South Africa, we're not strictly bound by the letter of the law. You know, we're a society where you don't have a statute spelling out in A, B, and C exactly what you have to do to tick the boxes of a particular offense. You know, our offenses are generally crafted in a broad manner so that the courts then look realistically at the facts and apply a common sense approach to see whether in fact this person was trying to do something unlawful. So, you know, if they are trying through some trickery to skirt around the letter of the law, they can still be convicted. You know, our courts are not easily hoodwinked by, you know, clever tricks. So if your intention, and it is a question of intention, whether you're committing incitement, if your intention is for people to do something unlawful, you're going to be convicted, no matter how you phrased what you've said. If the intention is clear, then you'll be convicted.
All right, so William, getting back to you, there's often media being accused of fanning the flames, and that, you know, they take a stance or a slant in a certain way. And what that does is that it generates anger with a certain group of people, and then they take to the streets. Is there a responsibility that the media has in how they tell the story? Because just the choice of words, you know, calling something a massacre instead of a killing might actually cause harm.
Yeah, so I mean, those are different concepts, the potential for causing harm, and incitement. You know, incitement is actively going and saying, okay, folks, let's go out and burn down the building, or let's do something. It's a fairly strong act and intention or encouragement to people to do something, as opposed to some kind of harm that may be caused if media show something. So media may show something that's particularly brutal or traumatic on TV, as the news does, and often they carry a warning and say, please be aware, sensitive viewers, you know, the following footage may be very upsetting, or something like that. They'll issue a warning so that you might know, I'm going to just switch off the television for that time until you know, that I think that's over, or I'm going to just mute it and look away, or whatever you choose to do, because if you see it, you may be exposed to some kind of harm. But that's a very different thing from a media organization that goes out and says, well, the people that are really behind this are faction A, B, C, or D, right? So when media do take a position like that, they're then failing in their basic duty around journalism and practicing quality journalism and journalistic
But William,
ethics.
if you use a loaded word like massacre, then somebody might say, hang on, we need to defend our people.
So I think that, you know, the choice of words is critical, and using a term like massacre, you know, you have to be very careful as to on what basis you're choosing to do that. You know, so people would refer to Marikana as the Marikana massacre deliberately, because there's an intent to convey some of the events that occurred on that day, as opposed to Marikana murders or Marikana killings or something like that. And certainly, I agree with you, it certainly does encourage that. But it's one thing for media to be biased, and even if they are biased in their selection of words, there's quite a long way to go from that to active incitement. So it's saying we used a massacre and therefore that justifies it. No, not at all. You know, and one of the people that you mentioned, and I'd be interested to hear Mr. Wink's view on this, is Julius Malema, who's very good at finding and treading that very fine line. And you'd remember there was some posts that he posted around the issues around clicks and the advert that they ran, their racist advert that they ran, and his instruction, he said, okay, fighters clicks there, fighters attack. And one of the position was, well, actually, in as much as that sounds like it might be an instruction to go and carry out something, there was a view that actually that wasn't sufficient. There wasn't a sufficiently high bar, and that's the thing. You know, we do have such a high threshold for freedom of expression. So even if media are biased, which, let's be clear, they must try and avoid being so, but you know, often their nature will determine their bias. Like the public broadcaster has a bias because it has a public service mandate. So it's not to say that they don't have that, but
all right. I'm
that
going to
shouldn't
move us
inform
along.
and encourage violence.
I'm going to move us along because we've got a caller, Kondile, who's in Mangaung, would like to say something. Kondile, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What are your thoughts? What would you like to put on the table?
No, look, Peter, this is interesting. Peter, this is very much interesting because journalism has moved away from your mass communication type of arrangement to social media. And what you are raising is very critical for me, that how far do we take issues? For an example, one of the things that you have raised is digital literacy. How do our people use social media, for me, is very critical. But it comes at a time when also South Africa, here in South Africa, we are grappling with a number of things. Characterization of scenarios. Here you are talking about massacre. There is a new term, insurrection. Now, characterization is very important for when you talk about freedom of speech. But in South Africa, and this is where I want advocate to come in, in South Africa, we also have to look at those freedom of speeches that we're talking about, because if you are not going to have limitations, I don't know what does it mean from freedom of speech. But again, you also have what is called popia in South Africa. Maybe it's subject for another time because it still has to be rolled out, and I would still want to see some of the cases really going to court, so that at some point we understand as to what are the limitations in terms of freedom of speech, because most of the time they infringe on other people's freedoms, Peter. So that is one area that I would want to see and experience within the social media space, particularly on Facebook and Twitter.
All right. You know what? We're going to take a quick break, so stay watching. We'll get Ben to give us a comment on that, and we'll talk about other issues as well relating to incitement, use of social media, and what happens when you delete a tweet. Does the problem go away, or if you apologize afterwards, does the original sin disappear? We'll discuss that and more after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Media and Society, and today we're taking a look at this issue of incitement on social media, freedom of expression versus breaking the law, literally. And just before the break, we had a caller, Kondile from Mangaung, and he put something on the table in terms of, freedoms should and must be curtailed at times. Ben, I guess that's how the law works, isn't it? I mean, the law's there, you have freedoms, but they can be curtailed to protect others.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people misunderstand what the right to freedom of expression means. It's not a license to say whatever you want. A useful rule of thumb is that your freedom ends where another person's rights begin. And it's the same for freedom of speech. So the metaphor that's used is that you can swing your arms freely, but you have to stop short of the other person's face, because then, of course, that becomes assault. And the same goes for speech. So your freedom of speech stops where it would incur into somebody else's rights to dignity, equality, reputation, and safety. So you would have defamation laws that protect people's reputation. So yes, you can speak freely, but if you wrongfully impair someone's reputation, so you impair someone's reputation without a justification, like truth or public interest, then you're committing a wrong. If you commit hate speech, and there's a very important judgment that came out on Friday, confirming that you don't have the right to say whatever you want if it then invades the rights of a community, a group of people, to enjoy dignity and equality in society and even safety. So in that case, it was John Kwelane's extremely hateful tirade 13 years ago against the LGBTIQ community, which was found to constitute hate speech. And the same goes for racist speech, sexist speech. The courts have consistently found that you cross a line when you invade other people's right to feel safe in society as a group. And then, of course, the incitement laws would protect people's right to safety, that your speech can't go so far that it actually endangers people.
William raised an issue about maybe that our laws, the bar is set quite high. Is that your experience? Is that a good thing, that perhaps there's a lot of protection for people's ability to express themselves, and that there's quite a high threshold before it becomes incitement?
The threshold is not as high as people think it is. So, for example, Julius Malema calling on fighters to attack, I think, would constitute incitement to commit unlawful acts. Obviously, police and prosecution services didn't take it seriously enough at the time. There may have been political considerations. They didn't want to further inflame the situation. And that's a matter of public policy, whether you do that or not. But on the purely legal question, I think it would constitute incitement. So the threshold is not as high as people think. It's really a question of common sense. If you say something that you know is going to create a dangerous situation for somebody else, whether it's in the context of a strike, whether it's in the context of a protest or a demonstration, then you risk attracting legal responsibility for that.
Does deleting a tweet disappear the problem, or once this original sin is there, it's there forever, even though it's been taken down from social media?
It doesn't make the problem disappear, so you would still be responsible for what you did, but it would mitigate the sanction. So if you defame someone on social media and then you remove it and you publish an apology, they could still sue you for the original defamation. But it would mitigate the damages that would be payable, because you've shown some kind of remorse, you've limited the extent of the dissemination, and you've apologized, which to an extent vindicates their reputation. So it would mitigate the damages. And in the same case, in a criminal context, if you incite and then you apologize, it could show remorse, which is a mitigating factor for sentence.
All right, so let's get another caller. I think we've got, is it Moses from East Rand Springs? Moses, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What are your thoughts on the issue under the microscope today? Hello? All right, it looks like he's gone. All right, so there is this whole grey area thing again, and I'm going to use Duduzile Zuma as an example as well, because I looked at this, and whilst I saw the words, she didn't actually say something provoking in terms of saying, go and do this, but maybe not a clever thing to say. So the image is an image of property that's in flames, that's burning, and she wrote, somewhere in South Africa, flames of freedom, Amandla, #free Jacob Zuma. What do you make of that? Let me start with you, William, and then we'll get a legal perspective.
So it's interesting because those cases were actually reported to Real 411, and I'm just trying to remember what the final outcome of each of them was individually. But I think that what you look at is that there was, I think she posted about 10 or 15 of those things, where each instance it was a video of violence, of trucks on fire, of shops, buildings, people blocking roads, acting in a fairly violent manner. And in each instance, she was saying, Amandla, or as you've just given in your example, the flames of freedom, or, yes, we see you, keep going kind of thing. And so while it's not an active call to say, yes, let's go, and I encourage you to do this, I think the fact that she was clearly saying, this is great, well done, people, it may be seen as something close to incitement because of the fact that of her public position, because of of her being in the public eye, because it was at the early stages of that violence breaking out. And at that time, you would have expected the daughter of the former president to be going, whoa, hold on, folks. Let's try and keep a level of order here. So that's on a basic level of the responsibilities of a leader. I think that was a deeply worrying trend to have set that she followed there. But I'll wait to hear Ben.
All right. Just before I get a legal thought from Ben, I've lost my train of thought now, so let's go to Ben. Ben, your thoughts then on that particular tweet. She didn't actually say, go and burn anything. She's quoting on an image of property being burned, and she's saying somewhere in South Africa, flames of freedom. Amandla.
You see, this is why I say that our law is about common sense, and the way our courts apply things is common sense, and that's the purpose of our courts, is precisely to deal in the grey areas and to sift the lawful from the unlawful where it is unclear. To me, it's quite clearly a case of incitement. You have someone who is trying to reach the minds of people quite deliberately and to tell them, continue doing this. It's incitement to commit arson, where you tweet a video of people committing arson and you say, keep at it. This is the right thing to do. And you're in a position, so the crime of incitement is, in my view, clearly established. And there are clearly aggravating circumstances for sentence. So the position that the person holds in society would aggravate the harm and then aggravate the sentence. So Ms. Sambudla Zuma was in effect at the time a self-appointed spokesperson for the former president who couldn't speak for himself, a self-appointed spokesperson for the family, and was lending that political and moral authority to what people were doing and endorsement, and saying you must continue, you must step up these efforts.
Right.
So in our law, when it comes to freedom of expression, whether it's from defamation law to incitement, you look at the meaning behind the words. It's not only what they say, but what they imply, what they mean, and you attach the legal consequences to that.
Okay, let's get to Mlungisi's view. I think, Mlungisi, you're in Johannesburg. Good morning to you. What are your thoughts?
Good morning, sir. Good morning to your panel members and the viewers at home. There are two things that worries me with the issues of interpreting this whole issue about freedom of speech, particularly in our context, because one of the things that we have noticed with the mass media doing information, disinformation, and running propaganda when they want to target certain individuals, and to an extent that they just coin a small comment and turn it to suit a certain narrative. The second part that worries me quite a lot is that South Africa, or let me say Native Africans, are still in a revolution against colonialism, and they want self-determination. In a process, they will say things that has to do with revolution, not inciting a person, a certain individual, but it will be coined to relate to a certain group of people that we cannot run away from. Because if we start running away from and trying to say that is incitement of violence, then we are restricting the real progress for Native Africans to free themselves from colonialism. How then will we play in that context?
All right, okay, we will get that question answered for you, but let's first hear from Michael, who's in Pretoria. Hello, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yes.
Hello, Michael.
Number one, I'm not happy that in your program for hours you featured two white men, no blacks.
Okay.
And two, there are just laws and unjust laws. Slavery was a law in the United States, but it was unjust.
Right.
Apartheid was a law in South Africa that doesn't make it just.
All right. So you're saying that we still have laws in our statutes that are unjust?
Yeah, you do. Number one, the South African demographics. You've got 80% blacks, and for hours you're showing us 2 white men. Does that look like it is fair?
Okay. All right. We take your point. Thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us, and we appreciate your thoughts very much indeed. All right. So, gents, couple of things coming up, and I just wonder if you've got any comments on what you've heard. Let's start with our lawyer, Ben.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you do have just laws and unjust laws, and we're still in a process of even 25 or 27 years later, sorting out which of the laws we've inherited from the past are just and unjust. A very useful case, which I think will be informative for viewers, is that Julius Malema, a couple of years ago, he had called on people to occupy land, occupy private land. He said he was calling on the landless to occupy private land, which is technically unlawful. He was doing so, for arguably a highly legitimate legal point, but he was charged with incitement to inciting people to commit crimes of unlawfully occupying land. He challenged the constitutionality of that law, the Riotous Assemblies Act, which said that it's a crime to incite anyone to commit an offense. And the Constitutional Court, and that was an apartheid statute which was passed in response to the Congress of the People, where the Freedom Charter was adopted. And the Constitutional Court said that the statute is unconstitutional, not because necessarily it's an apartheid law, because a lot of laws were passed during apartheid, the Marriage Act, a number of others that regulate ordinary life. But they said that it goes too far. It limits freedom of expression too far, because you could be guilty of inciting someone to commit a very minor offense, telling someone to go and shoplift or something. And the law shouldn't concern itself with that sort of thing. So they qualified it to say serious offenses. And the courts will then have to decide whether or not you're inciting someone to commit a serious offense. So we still need laws, and people get convicted of the crime of inciting murder, quite rightly. But the law then needs to draw a line, whether the law serves a just purpose or it's limiting free speech too far.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about reposting and sharing WhatsApp messages. Are you as guilty as the original author when you retweet, repost, and share, forward something in a WhatsApp group, for example? Ben?
Not necessarily. It depends how you contextualize it. So if you are tweeting something that you want to associate yourself with, and you say nothing, or you quote it with words of approval, then you would be, as responsible as the person who originally posted it. But you can disassociate yourself from the content. You can condemn it, and then, of course, that context is taken into account. There can be circumstances where you would be as guilty. So if, for example, someone is sharing child pornography and you then share it, but you're condemning it, you're still disseminating child pornography, and you'll still be guilty of that. But if it's something else, like a defamatory tweet, and you retweet it condemning it or saying that this is untrue, then you wouldn't be guilty of defamation.
All right, interesting. I think we've got another caller, Moses. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
Great, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I want to say good morning to our panelists. My thoughts is that, for us as South Africans to be clear about the Constitution is to know about the limitation of rights in the Bill of Rights, because the rights are equal before the law, of which that is the Constitution is the supreme law of the Republic. So, you cannot protect your rights by trampling on other people's rights. So the rights have got the limitations. So now I think the government what they have to do is to be on the campaign, to teach our people, to educate our people about the limitations of rights which are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. This is my thoughts, because this will give us the clear indication how to behave in society, social media, freedom of speech, everything. So you cannot say, I have a right to say everything. I agree with one of your panelists that rights does not mean that you have a right to say everything you like in society. So now, to be clear, is to know about the limitations of rights which are in the Constitution.
All right. Very sound argument there. Thank you very, very much indeed for that, Moses. We're going to start wrapping things up, and I want to start with you, William, with a question as well. So let's say there is an insightful tweet on social media that fans the flames. As a reporter, do I show a picture of that tweet even though it's been deleted, or am I adding to the problem?
Well, I think it's very much along the lines of what Ben just gave an example of. If journalism, they need to help people explain things. So we've, in this example, given a few instances of posts that we thought were incitement. We referenced some of the ones from Malema, etc. And in doing that, we're not doing it in order to encourage people to then go out and follow those acts. We're doing it as to give an example, to help people understand where the line of freedom of expression begins and where it may end, and where incitement may begin, for example. So if a journalist is using that and saying, these are instances of public figures who have behaved in a manner that looks as though it could incite, or if they've got a legal expert like you've got Ben there to say, do you think that this constitutes incitement? I think that that's perfectly reasonable and responsible. If, however, they're doing it and they're saying, look, here's a selection of some of the great tweets we've seen today, and it's and they're doing it, and then they don't pass any comment on it, or they don't actively pull out and point out the fact that this may well be incitement and that this is a problem, then I think the journalists aren't doing their job, because they're there to help people understand what's going on, to give them a sense of what's going on, and critically to explain these things, especially for a public broadcaster. So I think that they could use it quite easily, but they would need to contextualize it and then act on it. I think the big problem here, though, is that the speed at which we haven't yet touched on, that social media moves. Those people, someone posts something, and by the time the courts start to get involved, it's literally some years later down the line, and so you have to be finding better ways and mechanisms of addressing these issues as soon as we possibly can. And so while the courts and the law are very legitimate and completely appropriate methods to hold people accountable, we need other mechanisms, and that's part of what Real 411 does. So if people see something that they think constitutes incitement, they report it there. It gets reviewed by experts, and then if they think that it constitutes incitement, they'll write to the platform and say, please, can you take this down? And then they can, and that'll help to mitigate the spread, especially when you're in a highly tense, very volatile situation. And that's, and that's almost the nature of being in South Africa.
All right. William Bird, great talking to you. Thanks so much. Ben, in 30 seconds, Donald Trump has his Twitter account closed. President Buhari had some of his tweets deleted. Is that legal?
Well, Twitter's a privately owned platform. Essentially they can do whatever they want, as long as they then are not, actively doing something unlawful like spreading disinformation. They could be held accountable for that. But they're entitled to hold people to the community guidelines that users sign up to, which include, not spreading disinformation and that sort of thing. Or inciting hate speech, etc. So, Twitter and other private platforms, Facebook, etc., they're entitled to regulate speech. The question of whether morally they should be acting as the guardians or gatekeepers of what people say is a different issue.
All right. Ben Winks, independent legal counsel specializing in media, constitutional, international law. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. William Bird, always great talking to you as well. Thanks very much indeed, gentlemen. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at something completely different. And this is a channel that some of you may have watched already. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. Now, Channel N is a YouTube channel which was started by Sandile Ngobe in 2013 and later grew with the inclusion of Maxwell Dlamini and Nathi Valentine Manana. Now, the channel produces web series and comedy skits like Rolling with Mateu Boza and Jolanami and many, many more. I'm now joined by Nathi Valentine Manana, who is a producer, scriptwriter and director on Channel N. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've got to tell you, I'm a subscriber and I was looking at some of these videos and some so funny, and but also you've got other political commentary. So what's the idea behind this channel? It does so many things. It's almost as if you're competing with SABC as a general broadcaster.
Yes, no, it's like our main plan now is to turn it to a TV station, you see.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so tell me about what was the idea that inspired it and what is it that you're trying to do?
Actually, it's like I was inspired by the background and the environment that I grew up from, you see.
All right. Do you think that one of the reasons that you succeed is that there's a gap on what you see on mainstream media that you're able to fill with the work that you do?
Yes, yes. There's a huge gap there.
So tell us a little bit about some of the stories you like to show.
So far, we are working on Gakoko series. It's a Siswati web series. It shows more of a Maswati tradition and their social practices.
Mm. And programs like Jolanami, what inspired that? What were you trying to do?
No, it's just on Jolanami, it's just pranks. You see? Yeah, it's like it's only pranks on Jolanami.
All right, and you're getting quite a number of subscribers now. I think you're well over 123,000, I believe.
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, so do you get feedback from your viewers? What are they telling you?
It's like they want some more. That's why we are working on some more web series. We've got almost 8 web series that are online right now.
You know what? We wish you the best of luck. And if people haven't clicked on Channel N, lots of fun. Thank you so much indeed, Valentine, and good luck and best of wishes to reach 150,000 soon.
Thanks very much.
All right, that's how we come to the end of today's program. Don't forget, Rams Mabote will be back with you next week. In the meantime, thank you for watching and participating in Media and Society. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Dubai.